Hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining the session, and a very good evening to our speaker, Mr. Bilahari Kausikan. Uh, I would like to thank everyone for taking time off your Friday evening to join us for this session. I'm Geoffrey Lien, a member of the Young China Watchers Singapore, and I'll be a moderator for this session. So before we start the session proper, right, I would like to thank Mr. Kausikan for accepting our invitation for this session, and for being extremely accommodating, because we were supposed to have this session back in June in person at a physical location, but we have shifted it, I believe, twice because of the COVID situation. So really appreciate it. And um, so just sharing with everyone the profile of our speaker. Mr. Kausikan is currently the chairman of the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore and senior fellow at SMU School of Social Sciences. And he was also ambassador at large and policy advisor at Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Mr. Kausikan was formerly permanent secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and has served as Singapore's permanent representative to the United Nations and ambassador to Russia. So given his distinguished career and experiences, we are really honored to have him here to share with us his thoughts on the topic of China's Black Swan and its implications. So Mr. Kausikan first touched on this topic in an article that he wrote titled China and the Breeding of Black Swans that he contributed to the Global Brief. And the release of this article back then was met with a reply from the China's embassy in Singapore. So it's really great for us to have him dissect and discuss these black swans in greater detail, especially when there have been so much issues happening within the geopolitical sphere in recent months, because things have been progressing since February then. And hence it is with great pleasure that we are finally able to have him with us. And throughout this session, our Q&A will be open to the audience. So I strongly, if anyone has questions, you can use the reaction function below to give a thumbs up so that we can have you share your question in person. Or alternatively, you can just, share a message or question over to me and I can ask it on your behalf. But, since this is a good opportunity to engage Mr. Kausikan, I strongly encourage everyone to just ask your questions directly. And also a few house rules before we move into the sharing session proper. Please ensure that you are using your name for your Zoom profile and ensure that your videos are off and audio mics are muted unless you are sharing your question later during the Q&A segment. And with this, I'll pass the time on to Mr. Kausikan for sharing on the topic of China's Black Swan and its implication. Thank you, sir.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to talk to you. I don't want to make this a monologue, so I'll try to keep my opening remarks fairly short so that we can have maximum time for questions and answers, because that would be more interesting for both of us, I think, and you get to hear what you want to know rather than what I think you ought to know. All right. Black swans. I think, why do I think China may be breeding black swans? Well, in a word, let's put it this way. Reform and opening up started about 40 years ago. And China has done very well, particularly in the 90s and in the early part of the 2000s. But they have done very well because they started from a low base. They started from a fairly dysfunctional system, and just getting rid of the dysfunctionalities and doing some obvious things allowed them to grow, allowed them to unleash the natural potential of China, the Chinese people, and grow very rapidly. There has been no example in history of a huge country transforming itself with such rapidity in a relatively short period of time. However, they have done all the easy things, all the obvious things. And as early as 2007, then Prime Minister Wen did say China's growth was unbalanced. He used a whole string of adjectives, non-complimentary, and concluded that it was ultimately unsustainable. And that's 2007. In 2012, at the 18th Party Congress, the Chinese Communist Party officially acknowledged that its growth model, the growth model that gave it the spectacular growth in the 1990s and the early part of 1920s, was unsustainable. That growth model was essentially based on a heavy emphasis on infrastructure investment. Well, the early parts had some agricultural reform and so on, but essentially heavy emphasis on infrastructure development through the vehicle of state-owned enterprises. And that they knew was unsustainable over the long run. They also knew that growth was slow because their economy had become more developed. Not evenly, but overall more developed than it was 40 years ago. And the next year, in 2013, they rolled out a very detailed plan, which at its core envisaged, it still stressed SOEs, but it also envisaged, and this are their own words, a decisive role for the market in resource allocation. Now, very little of that plan has been implemented. I wouldn't say nothing has been implemented, but at very least it has been implemented in a very hesitant fashion, and only in certain areas. Where you see there has been more market liberalization has really been in the financial sector. Why have they been so hesitant? They acknowledge they have a problem. They came up with a solution, but they haven't found the ability to implement the solution in a wholehearted way. And this is not a totally irrational thing for them to have done. There is a fact about China that is extremely obvious, so obvious that it's almost invisible and doesn't figure very much in most analysis of China. And that fact is that China is a communist country. Of course, it's not communist in any ideological sense. I don't think you can find too many people who believe in Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, class struggle and all that sort in China anymore. But it is certainly a communist country in its political structure, in that it is a one-party state led by a vanguard party that claims for itself a monopoly of all power, not just in the political sphere, but in economics, in society, in culture, everything. And this creates a dilemma. On the one hand, you understand that the growth model requires your new growth model requires more emphasis on market efficiency. But on the other hand, you are a Leninist state with a vanguard party that claims a monopoly of power and control. And there's a dilemma because more market, by definition, means less control. The market really means letting go. And letting go not just in economics, but that has implications for other spheres as well. And so there is something of a vicious circle, particularly since at the 19th Party Congress 3 years ago in 2017, Xi Jinping had redefined the principal contradiction facing China as one between China's unbalanced growth and the people's growing expectations for a better life. In other words, there were rising expectations. And those rising expectations prescribed, is all in his speech, you can go and look it up, prescribed a very lengthy and complicated and multi-dimensional policy agenda. I think there were about 14 or 15 items of things to do, all domestic, mainly domestic. Now, dealing with the agenda will take a long time. It will take a lot of resources. How much time? Nobody really knows, but certainly it's not infinite time. How much resources? Nobody knows. And while China's reserves are huge, they are not infinite. And there are other calls on the reserves, particularly in an era of strategic competition and a trade war with the US, dealing with the pandemic and so on. So it creates a bit of a vicious circle. To meet people's rising expectations and fulfill that agenda of rising expectations, you need a lot of resources. Continually replenishing your resources means you need to continue to grow. Sustaining growth needs a new model. A new model needs a new balance between political control and market efficiency. That necessarily entails some political risks. And to mitigate the risks, you need to grow to meet the expectations, and so on and so on and so on. I'm not suggesting that nothing has been done. As I told you, they have done a few things here and there. But on the whole, nobody has found the political courage to take the kind of decisive action that Deng Xiaoping did 40 over years ago. What did Deng Xiaoping do? Don't forget, he had joined the Communist Party at a very early age, and he was a true believer in the theory of communism. But he took a long, hard cold look at his life's work and decided it was in some danger of failing, and decided to abruptly change course. Turn things around 180 degrees, actually. Now, very few people have the kind of political courage or the power to do that. And while Deng Xiaoping is extremely powerful, it's not much more powerful than any post-Deng Xiaoping leader. I don't think he's got quite the same kind of authority as Deng had as one of the original members of the Communist Party who went on the Long March and so on. So he has to be a bit more careful, and he has, and he's not totally irrational, and he has basically, since he came to power, coincidentally in 2012, the 18-party Congress, placed clearly the emphasis on more party control, more party discipline, including over private enterprises, whether Chinese or foreign. And he's not irrational to do so, because as I said, it's unprecedented for a country like China to have transformed so deeply and so broadly in such a short period of time, historically. And when you transform a huge country in such a short period of time, naturally, things are going to get unsettled. I don't believe the Chinese Communist Party is unpopular. I think it is quite popular with its people. I think Western analysts sometimes pay too much attention to dissidents because dissidents being dissident are dissident and more interesting. But I think the vast majority of people, while they may have grievances, they are grievances generally at the local level with local officials. Overall, the Communist Party has improved its life. Don't forget that since the late 19th century, when the Qing dynasty first came into contact with the West and had knowledge of its own weakness forced upon it by defeat in several wars, China has been trying to reform itself in search of the wealth and power that would allow it to reclaim what it considers its rightful place in the region and in the world. And it can't be denied that the Chinese Communist Party, particularly in its post-Mao incarnations, has been the most successful of all those political experiences. So I don't think it's unpopular, but it's not irrational to be a little nervous about social unrest, social stability, and so on. And so they are being cautious, and so they are caught in this vicious cycle. I am not suggesting at all that being caught in this vicious cycle, being able to take only partial solutions or suboptimal solutions and, kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 1 step sideways kind of progress will lead to the collapse of the political system in China. I don't think so. It's a very adaptable system. It's shown itself to be an adaptable system. And don't forget, as I said, it has more than a century of experimentation, political experimentation of experience. So it won't collapse, but you are circling around, improvising rather than confronting the core problem. And that's a kind of environment which I think black swans may be breeding. You can't know for sure, because black swans by definition are things you can't know for sure. They just surprise you. But it's quite notable that Xi Jinping himself, I didn't make up this thing, it's not an original thought, that black swans may be breeding. I mean, Xi Jinping has talked about black swans and what gray rhinoceroses, which means obvious problems that sometimes you just neglect. And in fact, some have hatched. Xi Jinping himself is a bit of a black swan because his basic mandate was really to try to clean up corruption without shaking things up too much. And I don't think anybody has anticipated the extent to which he would shake things up, including abolishing term limits, so that in theory he can stay as long as he's alive, you know. Now that has certain advantages. A Leninist system has certain advantages. It allows you to take long-term decisions without too much internal argument. There has been some unhappiness with Xi Jinping, but really, I think we shouldn't neglect the unhappiness in the party with Xi Jinping, but we shouldn't exaggerate it either. I don't see him as being in any danger of losing his job or being replaced. He can take long-term decisions. I'll come to the fifth plenum in a while, but one of the interesting things about the fifth plenum is that they set themselves the goal of becoming a moderately prosperous socialist country, or basically achieving socialist modernization by 2035. Previously, I mean, the timetables have always been a little bit vague, but previously the goal was sometime in the mid 21st century, at the 100th, at the 2049, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the PRC, round about there. But now he's kind of advanced it, or he seems to advance it. I haven't really, looked at the documents very closely, but he seems to have advanced the goal, and 2035 has a certain significance. What's that significance? He'll still be alive. To wait until 2049 is stretching it. He'll be 96 by that time. So even if he's alive, what condition he is in, nobody will know. But 2035, he'll be 82. So he can preside over the transformation, the completion of the first transformation of China. And so there is some advantages, and there's some logic to him concentrating power. He can make decisions without too much argy-bargy, without too much things. But I think he has also set up something akin to a single point of failure in the Chinese system. By a single point of failure, I mean that all decisions go to a single person or a small group of people, and therefore one mistake, one bad decision can have a disproportionate effect across the system. And that is compounded by the fact that the measures he has taken to consolidate his power and to try to stamp out corruption have made the cost of getting on his wrong side much higher, and there's some cause to wonder about what kind of and quality of information is being fed up to the top. For example, I think they were clearly taken by surprise by the turn in US-China relations. I know that almost for a fact, not quite for a fact, but almost for a fact. In 2017, you remember Trump happily announced the trade war around March when Liu He was visiting Washington, D.C. I was in the US at the same time, just a few days after Liu He, and I went to see a friend of mine who is a CEO of a big American multinational corporation, CEO and major shareholder, I should add, and he is a member of the US-China Business Council, and they had just met Liu He. So of course I asked my friend, what did you tell Liu He? And to my surprise, he said, we told him that it is not just Trump, it is all of us who have grievances about unfair trade practices, therefore intellectual property and all of that. And I was a little surprised because that mood in US businesses had been growing at least since the time of Bush 43, George W. Bush, which means a decade or more. And so I asked my friend, surely he knows this, and my friend agreed, he's been growing quite visibly for a long time, but he said, well, when Liu He didn't seem to know, he seemed a bit surprised. And that got me thinking about the quality of information that is being filtered outwards. Anyway, they were taken surprised by the trade war. That's another black swan. I think Hong Kong and Taiwan were another black swans, and Xinjiang is a potential black swan. Now, let me just end with a few words about the fifth plenum. When you are caught in a vicious circle, as I think the Chinese are, you generally need a big shock to break out of it. Now, is the state of US-China relations, are the restrictions on technology and so on, a big enough shock to make the Chinese steel themselves to finally not totally relinquish control? I mean, not for the Chinese Communist Party to totally relinquish control, but to take their own plans to give a more decisive role to the market more seriously. It's a bit early to say. I just have not studied what happened at the fifth plenum very carefully, but it seems to be a little bit more of the same. The emphasis seems to be on domestic circulation, which means trying to be more self-reliant, import substitution, trying to rely far more on domestic consumption, which they have been trying for a decade or more, but they seem to have plateaued. And of course, relying more on their own technology and becoming more self-sufficient in technology. Because of all the parts of the trade war that have actually hurt China and are hurting China and will continue to do so, at least in the medium term, by which I mean 10 years or more, it is the technology restrictions, particularly those on semiconductors. Will they succeed? Too early to tell. And I know I've just taken a cursory look at what they said they will do. It seems to be a lot of things that they already said they will be doing ever since 2013, and certainly reiterated in 2017, and now and been saying off and on between 2017 and now. Too early to tell whether they will succeed, but it's not going to be easy. There are two reasons. One, there is a minor vicious circle here. Why is domestic? They have been trying, as I told you, to increase domestic consumption for a long time. And they seem to have plateaued around 38, 39, 40% of GDP attributable to domestic consumption. Whereas in most economies, the size of China, it's generally around 50%, and in an advanced economy like the US, it's around 60%. Why have they stalled? They seem to have plateaued out at around 38, 39, 40, under 40%. I think it's because the propensity to save in China is extremely high. Yeah, they are consuming more, but they are also saving more. They have more income, so they spend more, but they also save more. And that's because basically the social protections, the health system and so on, is not very good. And that creates a minor vicious cycle, because in order to fix the social protections, the housing, health, social safety nets, you need the growth. To need the growth, you need the new model, and so on and so forth. So you really need to do something drastic. Technology, it's not so difficult. In the very long run, especially it's not so easy, particularly in semiconductors. They have been trying for more or less 20 years to build the advanced semiconductors. They have always failed. And they have always failed not because they don't have the money, not because they don't have the brains, because it's a very complex industry. It's a very, okay, put it this way, right? It's a very competitive industry, and that's why it's concentrated in only, the most advanced chips, only 3 companies make them. One is American, one is Taiwanese, one is South Korean. In other words, either American, ally of America, or a country completely dependent on America for security, and they are being cut off. It's hurting them. Now, it's not that I told you it's very hard to catch up, because I'm not a technology expert, but I've been talking to a lot of experts in the semiconductor industry, and I try to summarize what they say. It's possible to make one or two very advanced chips. Even Singapore, if you go to NTU or NUS, they can probably make you one or two of the most advanced chips. They can design their own, they can make it for you. But if you're going to have a viable chip industry, you have to be able to produce hundreds or millions of chips commercially, and that's not so easy. And the reason, my kind of amateur summary of what the experts have been telling me is that the competitiveness of, let's say, Taiwan Semiconductor or Samsung or Intel is more than the sum of its parts. That means each part of these companies have process secrets, and you put it all together, the whole thing is bigger than all the parts. Now, China can do all the parts. They can they can hire or poach engineers, and they are doing so, but they cannot have the whole system. There's another problem there, because a lot of the foundational technologies are either have American IPR in one way or the other in them. And that is not completely blocked, because people can still get licenses to export to China, and some licenses have been granted, but it gives the Americans a chokehold. In the very long run, experts tell me there may be a paradigm shift in the chip industry, which means that all the advantages or the disadvantages for China can be wiped out by completely new three-dimensional kind of process chips. To make it, again, what I understand, very, very simple, right now you're trying to make things smaller and smaller and smaller. But if you have 3D technology, you can stack much more on a given size of chip. And so you can do the same thing with a larger chip. I mean, I'm making it very simplistic, and I'm probably wrong in the details, but this is what it amounts to. In the long run, there can be this kind of technological paradigm shift. That means that your disadvantages of being a latecomer are wiped out. But we are not there yet. So they are trying. So whether their dual circulation is going to work or not, it's a bit early to say. I'll stop here now and take your questions. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Kausikan, for your sharing. So as the moderator, I'll exercise my moderator rights to ask the first question. So just now in your article and your sharing previously, you mentioned that there are three main black swans, which is Xi Jinping himself, the trade war, and Hong Kong, and then you also added Taiwan.
Hong Kong and Taiwan, I put in one category.
Oh, sorry, Hong Kong and Taiwan in one category, and Xinjiang too. So may I have your thoughts on, based on the current situation, which of these black swans will possibly shake China the most? And if you have noticed other black swans beside these three that are currently breeding?
Well, the ones that are having the most impact right now, most direct impact, is obviously relations with the US. I told you they didn't anticipate any of this, right? And this is something that goes beyond Trump. So in a few days' time, the Americans will vote. If all the polls are correct, and there are different kinds of polls this time than last time, he ought to lose. Not 100% sure to lose, but ought to lose. But I don't think it's going to make much difference if Mr. Biden sits in the White House instead of Mr. Trump. Because there is a consensus, not just in the US, by the way, it's a global consensus. If there is a kind of anti-China coalition in the world, it's not because of anything America did, it's because a lot of countries have got concerns about Chinese behavior. Right? In fact, I can't think of any major economy that doesn't have some concerns about Chinese behavior. It's global, right? And it's not because of the US, it's because of what China has been doing itself, right? That's an existing black swan. Hong Kong, Taiwan, and to some degree overseas Chinese too. I don't think actually the Chinese Communist Party understands the mentality or the changes that have gone on in Taiwan and in Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong is a done deal. There's not much that to be done for it. They have done what they have to done, the national security law and so on. In other words, if you won't voluntarily submit to my control, I will coerce you into submitting to my control. Taiwan is more complicated. I don't think they fundamentally understand these two things. And to some degree, they fundamentally don't understand overseas Chinese too. Because you ask any Hong Kong person, you ask any Taiwanese, are you Chinese? Are you Huaran? Of course, he will say yes, right? Was he Martian or what, right? But then what do you mean by Chinese? That's not a simple question, no? What is a definition of a Chinese, right? And that part, they won't accept the Chinese Communist Party's definition of being Chinese, right? And that's exactly what Xi Jinping is being trying to impose on them, and to some degree on overseas Chinese too, and he's meeting resistance. Xinjiang is a potential black swan. What they are doing in Xinjiang, I think, is horrendous, but ultimately it will fail because it's based on a fundamental contradiction. I don't think, again, they understand Islam. Islam is not like, Xinjiang is not like Tibet. First of all, how can you sinicize, as they have said is their goal, how can you sinicize a universal religion? It's a bit contradictory, isn't it? I mean, religion is universal, this religion is universal, so it's either universal or it's not, right? And even the more sinicized part of the Muslims in China, which is the Hui, they are being repressed now. It's not just the Uyghurs, you know. Their ability to practice their religion in a very Chinese way, actually much more than say the Uyghurs, is being suppressed. And there's a big difference between Xinjiang and say Tibet. Tibet also, they have problems, but I think it's very minor problems compared to Xinjiang, potentially. Why? Because who really cares about Tibet? There is a small Tibetan community, not so big, in India or in Indian territory, but basically who the hell in the rest of the world cares about Tibet? A few individuals here and there, Richard Gere in Hollywood, so what, big deal, right? But in Xinjiang, there is a global community of Muslims, the Ummah. It exists on the internet. Now, right now, there is no Muslim government that has made a big fuss about Xinjiang, right? And I don't think they want to. But their people certainly know about what's happening there and are not very happy. And this is particularly true in Central Asia. When I was able to travel, one of the places I was traveling around quite a lot since I retired was Central Asia, because I have a personal interest there. And the people, the governments don't want trouble because they need the Chinese investment and so on. Anyway, China is a neighbor, they don't want to really fight with it if they can help it. But the people are not happy. There is a lot of ground level anti-Chinese feeling as there is in places like Cambodia, Laos, you know, Myanmar, even Pakistan. And all it needs is a spark. Look at what's happening to France now. Right? One incautious statement by Macron, and a lot of things happen. Look at what happened in the past when some Danish cartoonists also drew sort of satirical cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, right? There was no Muslim government at that time that wanted to make a fuss, but their people forced them because the people got worked out. Now, it may not happen in China, or it may be happening as we speak, or it may happen next week, or it may never happen, but it's a potential black swan. But the most dangerous black swans are those that we don't know about. We can't even think about them right now. We don't know by definition.
Okay. Thanks, sir. So sorry, just I should have brought this up earlier, everyone. But if anyone has question to ask again, please click on the thumbs up reaction emoji, and we will get back. And we will
Somebody called Su N Tay appeared on my screen. Maybe she has a question.
Oh yes. Swan, do you wanna share? Swan is on already. Yeah. Please.
Hi, sorry. I couldn't find a thumbs up. I'm a little bit confused.
There's no thumbs up disappeared. I can't find it either.
Sorry.
No, thumbs up is in the most under the reactions icon.
Okay,
nevertheless, I would give a clapping emoticon to thank you very much for your remarks. I'm Suanti. I'm actually with Young China Watchers. I work with the rest of the other 9 chapters around the world. And we've been trying to get you for a very long time. So I'm very pleased that you're here today. I just wanted to pick up a question on China policy under Biden. because it's very interesting. Obviously, we see, all the former Obama people now publishing aggressively in foreign affairs, foreign policy, trying to articulate, where they see a Biden administration would go. And I think we are quite confident in that, Biden will then kickstart re-engagement with its allies, including Europe. And what we may see is perhaps a more cohesive policy against China, along with the Europeans. And I think this will then further deepen this bifurcation that we're actually seeing right now. I think to your point about, the American CEO telling the OHA that, that they were very unhappy. I think we've seen this unhappiness for a very long time.
No, but that's why China missed it somehow.
I don't know if they missed it. I think
they didn't care. They didn't think it was so important. I don't know.
Yes, I know, I agree, because I feel like the Trump administration was a tipping point, is that the Germans were very unhappy, the French were very unhappy. But
everybody got unhappy more or less simultaneously.
Right. But the Chinese have always been able to divide and conquer, because if the Germans were unhappy, the companies will come in and try and take up our contracts. But I think what happened with Trump coming in, then they kind of coalesce with the US industries, and then the European companies then kind of added to that momentum. So I mean, I'm very curious about your thoughts about, under a Biden administration, with increased allies engagement, to have a more coherent China policy. And so what Beijing will be up against, a more aggressive policies by the French in Indo-Pacific. Maybe the Americans will get around to the Indo-Asia strategy. How is this bifurcation going to play out for China, and also, I suppose, for the rest of the ASEAN countries?
Well, first of all, I don't think there can be complete across-the-board bifurcation. Right? If you look at what figures are available now, trade and investment actually hasn't gone down. There's been no bifurcation in trade and investment. It's actually gone up a bit between the US and China. Even if you look at technology or semiconductors, which I mentioned, you can't simply cut off 40% of the world's market without harming yourself, right? Because most of the suppliers, are either American or friends and allies of America, right? And they have just granted some licenses, including to Huawei. I think they gave Sony a license to sell some stuff to Huawei, and they will give some more. The weapon there is not the bifurcation per se, not the physical bifurcation, but the uncertainty. You have to apply for a license. I may give it to you, or I may not give it to you. It's very hard for you to plan, This uncertainty is itself a very potent weapon. But I don't think there'll be complete, but there may be in certain domains, for certain technologies and certain things. But across the board bifurcation, I don't see it happening. At the same time, I think you're right. There is already a very loose, I wouldn't want to call it anti-China, a loose coalition of countries with concerns about China, right? Not all of them have the same concerns. Not all of them have the same intensity of concerns, but there's a fairly large, in fact, I can't think of any major economy that doesn't have some concerns. In fact, some small economies also have concerns, right?
Perhaps maybe not so much anti-China, maybe a bit more aggressive about asserting a level playing field.
No, yeah, but you see, there, I think I'm not very optimistic. I tell you why. Why is the playing field unlevel in the first place in China? It's not that all Chinese are crooks, It's that the playing field is unlevel because of that fundamental fact of China that people always neglect. It is a communist country with the Leninist party that has a privileged position. And every business, every Chinese business in particular, has to cultivate relationships with the Communist Party, and the Communist Party in turn cultivates it, and there's this system of reciprocal favors where they are given privileges. That's not going to go away because that's how China works, It can be mitigated here and there, it can be tempered here and there. And they have tried, it's not, look at their new investment law, look at their new intellectual property law, right? Okay, there's certain vagueness in it and so on. But in China, it's always implementation. It's not the rule. It's how the rule is implemented. and that's not just true of business, it's true of everything. In diplomacy, they make this big statement, but how they do it is another matter. It's always another matter. And in China, in this tight relationship between party and business, which is the essence of the system, it's even worse. And there's another problem there. No? The emperor, the rivers are deep, the mountains are high, and the emperor is far away. There is always all Chinese regimes have had great difficulty in getting local officials to do what the emperor wants. And then this is no different. So I think China will make tactical adjustments. The implementation is one issue, but they can't make the fundamental changes, which are the fundamental cause of the unlevel playing field. So if you're going to do business in China, you just got to accept it up to a point. And I think people will. I've been talking to other business people, sometimes by Zoom. Okay, Japanese business, right? I've asked, I'm quite close to some of them, the big ones, because I know them for a long time. So I was talking to them by Zoom recently. They said, of course, we are not going to neglect China. It's not possible. But we are not going to do certain things in China anymore. Right? And I think that's the attitude. My last trip before I got shut up in this large cage was to Germany. And I talked to some German corporates, and they more or less told me the same thing. We can't neglect China, but we're not going to be taken for a ride anymore. We won't do certain things there. We won't sell them certain things. Right? The other thing that Biden may do. Now, I think everybody knows that he's not going to fundamentally change the China policy. He's not going to fundamentally change his attitude towards trade because America has changed. Right? He may make the process more orderly, the decision-making more orderly. It'll be a bit more transparent. The atmospherics will improve, and that's all good, right? But don't forget, he doesn't come to the White House if he wins with totally free hands. The divisions in the Democratic Party between the progressive wing and the traditional wing, which we saw during the primaries, are still there. Nothing has been settled. They're just containing themselves because they want to win. If they do win, these things will come to the surface. And Biden will be pulled in all kinds of directions. He has to do something for the progressive wing. He can't just brush them aside. I don't know whether you saw the news. Elizabeth Warren has said, I want to be Treasury Secretary. Oh my God, I think American businesses are going to all vote for Trump now. All right. But he has to do something for them. And so while he will not fundamentally change direction, he may add new things to the agenda. Labor issues. Certainly environmental issues will become more prominent in trade negotiations, right? And that's another complication. So I don't think it's going to be all milk and honey, if Trump goes away. I've been trying to warn people that don't expect, this is not like, you were expelled from paradise because you ate the apple called Trump, and now that you spit out the apple, you go back to paradise. No, it wasn't paradise in the first place. Huh? So I'm not very sanguine that things will get appreciably much better, even if Trump is not around. It may get worse,
No, I don't disagree at all. But like you said, a bit more orderly. But in fact,
that's good. Let's be grateful for small things. A bit more orderly is good. Okay.
Right. I'm just saying perhaps a greater, more cohesive wall of coalition.
Oh, that is possible. That is certainly possible.
Yeah.
It won't be very cohesive because I said not everybody has concerns, but they're not the same concerns, not held with the same intensity, right? But certainly if you're nicer to your allies, it'll be easier to work with them, right?
Thank you very much.
So thanks. Then I see that Mr. Luffy Siddiqui has given a thumbs up. Can I trouble you to on your video and unmute yourself to
His
share a
video
question?
is on, but I can't hear him.
Yeah, also please kindly identify yourself before asking your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Kausikan. My name is Lutfi Siddiqui. I'm with the London School of Economics. My question is, what explains this apparent belligerence right now in terms of foreign policy, whether it's militarily with India, saber rattling with Taiwan, Hong Kong, Australia? I would have expected a bit more of a charm offensive, I would have thought, in the current setting, but I don't understand the calculus behind this belligerence.
Well, China is a country of contradictions. Two different things are always true in China at the same time. Okay, it is true they are having a charm offensive, not just with the countries you name, they're with other countries. It's not working very well. You look at Mr. Wang Yi, I rather like him. He was my counterpart once when before he became foreign minister, the senior official in charge of relations with ASEAN, right? And he's not a bad fellow, you look at him, he went to Europe, and what did he do? He got a whole series of slaps all around Europe, poor guy, right? But it's not, they're not trying charm offensive. First, charm does not help when you have substantive issues, right? Second, when China is feeling insecure, they always reach for the nationalism tool. But when they are confident, they also reach for the nationalism tool. And right now, I think post-pandemic, for them is post already, they're feeling simultaneously confident and insecure. Okay, they are confident because they did deal with it very well, much better than anybody else. Now, mind you, no other system in the world could have done what they did, right? Right? On the other hand, it is also not been forgotten, including by the Chinese people, why this thing got out of hand in the first place. It got out of hand because of the imperatives of a Leninist system, which had crucial delays in passing information to where decisions could be made. That's a good example of what I call a single point of failure. There's everybody. The mayor of Wuhan said himself, he was being criticized, why you never take this, why they never told us that this is serious before earlier. And he said, I had to get permission from Beijing. And to my surprise, he hasn't been sacked. I thought he'd be sacked, but to my surprise, he hasn't been. So people haven't forgotten that. And it's just bad luck that happened during the Chinese New Year, where the Chinese were traveling a lot. At some other time of the year, it may not have spread so much inside China and outside China, but just bad luck. So they are feeling a bit insecure with their own people, and because growth is going to be slow for some time. It's all very good to talk about internal circulation as a substitute, but as I said in my opening remarks, they've been trying for some time and they have plateaued out, right? There's a minor vicious circle there. And now they will have positive growth this year. We don't know how much. They didn't set any targets, but they'll be the only major economy with positive growth. However, they are much more dependent on growth to legitimize rule than any other country, right? So, and they are feeling confident and they're feeling insecure. I did well, but hello, I have some problems. All my potential competitors are not doing so well, so maybe this is the time to push the envelope. But I'm also a bit insecure, so I better wave the flag and use nationalism by pushing the envelope. So everything is not, don't expect consistency in China because it's too big. Basically, it's too big, it's been pulled in. All big countries are never consistent. The same is true of American foreign policy. You cannot be consistent, it's just too big. Okay, I can't hear you. Did you have something?
No, just thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay, sure. So we have a next question from Joy Ting Zhang. So sorry, Joy Ting, can I trouble you to unmute yourself and on your video? And yes, also identify. Oh, okay, thanks. And please kindly identify yourself before asking your question. Thank you very much.
Hey, hi. So I'm actually. Can everyone hear me? Sorry.
I can hear you, but I can only see half your face.
Okay. I'm actually overseas Chinese in your category, residing in Singapore right now. So actually, I have a question regarding kind of the implication of Black Swan of China, the impact of it for Singapore, because as the current situation, a lot of actually tech companies in China actually moved their HQ to Singapore. So I think to Singapore, it seems also like a black swan, but like a good black swan that now there's a lot of like demand for tech talent. I think so kind of I would love to hear your thoughts on how this is gonna evolve for like technology sector, but just overall like how the relationship of everything of this is impacting for Singapore.
Well, first of all, I think it is fundamental to everybody, whether they realize it or not just Singapore, that a stable China is much better than an unstable China, right? Even if China gets too assertive as it is under Xi Jinping, or actually it started under the end of Hu Jintao's reign, right? That causes problems, but the problems caused by unstable China are much worse, okay? So it's in everybody's interest that China does well, right? Whether these tech companies moving will benefit Singapore or not, I think it's too early to tell. I have told some of my former colleagues in the government, please don't break out the champagne and start celebrating too soon. TikTok coming here, who else is coming? Tencent has come, and a few more in the pipeline. May also bring you all kinds of unwelcome attention from the Americans. You too are going to be subject to the technology restrictions. The restrictions, I don't know whether you have looked at the restrictions that the Americans have put about the export of technology. Basically, anything that has any intellectual property from America in it requires a license. Anything that makes a chip. And a lot of the foundational technologies in chips in particular are American. Even if the country is Taiwanese, and the Taiwanese already are pulling back because they need America for security, right? So that's a simple one. But in the Europeans, the Dutch make a certain kind of machine without which you cannot design and high-end chips, right? The Americans put a lot of pressure on the Dutch not to sell it to China, and they succeeded. And the Chinese are trying to make their own machine, right? And they can succeed. But a lot of the things that go to the machine are also dependent on American intellectual property. So they will also need a license. As I said, licenses will be granted. Some have already been granted here and there. But it's the uncertainty that is the weapon. So I don't think it's all good thing for Singapore, you know. Okay, it's good for us that in this time of recession, there's new investment coming from the Chinese tech companies. And it's the kind of investment we want because it's higher up the value chain. But it might bring all kinds of unwelcome attention too, you know. So I think these things, the ones that come to Singapore, I'm not sure, they are too young to know whether they're going to grow up to be swans or some more dangerous animal. So I will reserve judgment. We just can't know right now. But I don't think all this is going to end anytime soon. Right? And if you read Chinese speeches, you read the speeches at the 5th plenum, and even before, they know it too. They know it too. Last year's Liang Hui, I mean, Xi Jinping, Li Keqiang and all that, they were quite sober in their assessment of the international situation. Ultimately, they said, we will succeed. Of course, they have to say that, and I don't think they will fail, right? But it's going to be very tough for them. And look, frankly, I'm a diplomat, right? Some of the things that there is a change in the Chinese diplomatic service. It's not the same as it was before, right? It's certainly not the same. Recently, something happened which is very interesting to me as a former diplomat. Two Chinese ambassadors were appointed to Ethiopia and Pakistan, right? What is very interesting is neither of them were diplomats. Neither of them is from the foreign ministry. They were both from local officials, you know, from, I forget which provinces they were. They were provincial officials. Now that is a great slap in the face of a foreign ministry, you know, because the Chinese foreign ministry always prides itself on being able to hold all the senior positions, right? And don't forget, under Yang Jiechi, they didn't have anybody in the Politburo for many, many years. So it's not in good shape, their diplomacy. But as I said, it's not fundamentally a diplomatic problem. The root cause is certain Chinese behaviors which many people find unacceptable in different domains. Sometimes in politics, sometimes but mainly in economics and and business, right? But the root cause of the unlevel playing field is, I told you, is because China is a communist country where the party's interests always are more important than any other interest, right? Whatever happens, the party must always come out on top. And that creates all kinds of distortions, which other people find unfair. But you can't change your system, so you got to have to live with this for a long time, you know. And I don't think better diplomacy is going to help. I don't mean to depress you, but maybe you want to stay in Singapore a bit longer.
Okay, thanks for the reply, sir. So sorry, there were a few more questions. So kind of got lost in the comments.
Yeah.
There was this question by Hazel. Sir, if any of the black swans you have mentioned come to pass, what are the conditions under which they might play to China's advantage?
Well, some have come to pass and some are potential, right? I can't tell you what of the relations with the US that black swan has hatched. It's waddling around, you know, if not flying yet. Taiwan, Hong Kong, that black swan has hatched, right? The Hong Kong one is not a big deal because it's already part of China, it can be crushed, right? Uyghurs, it might be very troublesome if it does hatch. But the US black swan certainly has spurred the Chinese to try to become more self-reliant in certain technologies. Now, whether they will succeed or not is not going to be as easy as some people seem to think, for all the reasons I have mentioned in my opening remarks and in other questions. But I don't know, because I can't say what is the upside of a black swan because the black swan has not yet been hatched. Taiwan, Hong Kong, that black swan, I don't see any upsides because right for China. The US black swan, I see a theoretical upside. Anyway, the Chinese have said is going to make us try harder and be more self-reliant, and it will make them try harder and be more self-reliant. The Xinjiang black swan, if it hatches, is big trouble all over the place. I don't know whether you all know that, for example, in Gwadar, in Balochistan, in Pakistan, the China-Pakistan economic corridor that goes down from Central Asia, from the west of China, through Central Asia, down to Gwadar in the western part of Pakistan. There are militant groups there that have sworn to kill Chinese. And they have killed many Chinese engineers and so on, you know, because they don't like what's happening there. Now, that's actually a relatively small problem now. It's just a very localized problem. But if you get the Muslim world against you, you can be, you know, it can be very troublesome everywhere, you know. It may never happen. It may happen tomorrow. Who knows? But I can't tell you about black swans, other black swans, because I don't know what they are. By definition, I don't know what the black swans are.
Okay. Thanks, sir. So, sorry, sir. This is a question from me. So, building on what you have shared earlier, the recent COVID-19 saga has shown, you know, the many successes and challenges that China currently face with its current governance model, where local governments often do not have the power to act decisively because they need permission from the central government. But just wondering, like, if you can gaze into your crystal ball as you have shared on your Facebook post before, like, how do you foresee the political landscape of China will possibly be impacted or change, you know, post the COVID-19 saga, or even in the future? Like, are there any possibility of them revamping, restructuring, or changing some of their models?
Okay, I think China made a very serious mistake. China, after some delay, responded to the serious mistake very well, right? And both the strength and the weakness have the same cause: the Leninist one-party system with very narrow channels of reporting, right? I don't think that's going to change, because that means fundamentally changing the whole system, and that's not going to happen. But I think what can change is better healthcare, which is already on the agenda to meet rising expectations. I think maybe empowering local officials a little bit more. That I'm not so sure. Towards the end of Hu Jintao's era, they did kind of like experiment with what they call intra-party democracy at the local level. That means giving a wider range of choice of who gets to be appointed to or elected to certain positions at the local level, giving the local officials a little bit more autonomy. But that was reversed under Xi Jinping. So I don't see any fundamental changes in the Chinese system, except what I would call technical changes, better healthcare system, maybe a faster reporting system, right? And a reporting system that doesn't distort things too much as the information flows through it. Because don't forget, in Wuhan, one of the complaints was not only delay, one of the complaints was that there were officials trying to stop doctors from reporting that they found a new disease. So some of these technical issues can be fixed, but the fundamental system is not going to change in any basic way, I think.
Okay, thanks, sir. So also building on one of your previous reply about, recently there were 2 diplomats who were elected to China's foreign affairs department, and they
As ambassadors to Ethiopia and Pakistan.
Yeah. So Swan, the lady who asked the first question, has a follow-up. Is she was wondering if this will be a new trend because they have no MFA background and is from Ningxia. So is this going to be a new patronage?
One is from Ningxia, one is from somewhere else. I can't remember. Anyway, they were from really local areas.
Yeah, she was just wondering, is this going to be a new patronage trend that you see happening?
I don't know. Is too soon to tell whether it's a trend or not. It caught my attention because I'm interested in such things, and it struck me as rather unusual, particularly where they came from. One of the persistent complaints against Chinese diplomats is that they didn't really understand very deeply their own country's problems. In fact, that's a normal complaint against diplomats of all countries. So there is some sense to getting some outsiders from other departments to come here to be in the, but it's too early to say whether this will become a trend or not. 2 is not a trend to me, because these 2 things will happen only relatively recently, and we'll just have to wait and see. But it is quite clear to me for some time that the status of the Chinese Foreign Ministry in the decision-making process in China has been steadily going down.
Okay. Thanks, sir. Sorry, let me just take a quick look at the chat. Okay. So sorry, just shifting the angle to ASEAN itself, because this also has been quite a hot topic. So in recent months, right, the US has been putting on increasing pressure on ASEAN, and this pressure seems to be, increasing as we come closer to election. And, in my opinion, because US may want to use like China as a boogeyman towards their political agenda or something. So for instance, on the 10th of December, Mr. Mike Pompeo told ASEAN during the ASEAN Regional Forum to act against China's bullying and told top diplomats across the 10-nation bloc to not just speak, but act. And don't let the Chinese Communist Party walk over you and our people. You should have confidence and that the American will be here in friendship to help you. So, with all this ever-increasing pressure, like what do you think will be the main challenge to ASEAN in its goal to maintain neutrality? And, be it now or, in the future under either a Trump or a Biden presidency?
Well, being under pressure from major powers, and China has also deployed a lot of pressure on ASEAN at times, it's not new. The challenge is, as you said, to be neutral or not take sides, as we like to say. Now, but we have to be very clear in our understanding of what being neutral means. Being neutral doesn't mean, laying low, bowing your head and saying nothing and hope nobody notices you. That is not going to happen. Being neutral means having a clear idea of what your own interests are, either as a country or as a nation or as a region, and following those interests despite the pressures. Those interests might sometimes cause you to tilt towards the US on some issues, It might cause you to tilt towards China on other issues, or you might cause you to tell both of them to go fly a kite and go your own way on some other issues. That is what being neutral means, right? ASEAN has done it before in actually much more difficult circumstances, where the pressures were not just verbal, but kinetic, use of force and coercion, use of subversion, and so on. We have dealt with that before. I don't see any reason why we can't deal with it now. There is, however, one major complication. I think we expanded too fast without adequate socialization. We did not socialize the new members in what ASEAN, how ASEAN works, how it operates, and so on adequately. And we are paying the price for it, but it's not unmanageable now. It could get unmanageable, and then we'll have to think again about what to do.
Okay, thanks. So, sorry, let me have a look at the list. Okay. So, you know, so with regards to the upcoming, okay, so this is with regards to a question relating to world order. So, seeing that, you know, China has been antagonizing quite a few of the countries around the world, and they do have made it quite clear that they want to, in a way, reclaim their place. Yeah. So do you think that, I mean, so how do you think the wolf warrior diplomacy that they're currently exhibiting going forward, do you think that they will, you know, persist with it, or do you think they will change their approach? Because they seem to have, from what we all can see, they seem to have forgotten Mr. Deng Xiaoping's maxim of, you know,
yes, hide your light,
yeah, correct.
Hide your capabilities and bide your time.
Bide your time, yeah, exactly. So just wondering about that, because there have been like a very big question with regards to, you know, international relations.
You know, you're right. They have certainly abandoned that policy of hide your capabilities or hide your light. I mean, there are different translations, and bide your time, right? It's not, it started actually at the end of Hu Jintao's period in power. Now, the problem with that policy, with abandoning the policy of hiding your capabilities, is you cannot reverse it. Once you show your capabilities, once you reveal your intentions, people are not going to forget it. All you can do is mitigate the effects. Now, wolf warrior diplomacy, they have actually tried to calm it down. Obviously, it was counterproductive. Even some of the older Chinese diplomats, like Madame Fu Ying, who is not a softie, by the way, she was also my counterpart. She has retired too. I saw that she wrote an article in People's Daily, very carefully, indirectly saying this is not a good idea, okay? And she can't do that unless, she can't get her article published in People's Daily unless somebody much more important than her also thinks it's not a good idea, you know, in China, right? Not necessarily Mr. Xi Jinping or his inner circle, but, you know, there are different factions, you know that, right? Okay. They have tried to tone it down a bit, but it's been quite disastrous for them. It's been, you know, they have pissed off the Swedes, they have pissed off the Canadians. It takes quite a lot of effort to get Canadians and Swedes angry with you, you know. All right, you really have to work very hard to get Canadians and Swedes angry with you. And they try to calm it down, but as I said, once you reveal your capabilities and your intentions, you can't make people forget it. So the issue is not really wolf warrior diplomacy. They can calm that down. They are calming it down actually, right? You know, as I said, they are not unadaptable, right? But once you have revealed yourself, people are not going to forget. It is the substance of your behavior that people object to, not the diplomacy per se. Right? And some of those behaviors, they can modify, make tactical adjustments. Some they can't because it's inherent in the nature of the system. So they are facing a problem. There is another problem, don't forget. China is actually a very inexperienced international player. It's only very recently it has been acting internationally in many regions of the world. Previously, they defined their interests from the end of Mao. Mao was trying to spread revolution all over the place, Africa, everywhere, right? But from Deng Xiaoping to almost the end of Hu Jintao's era, which is quite a long time, they were actually defined their interests very narrowly. They didn't try to play a big role all over the place. So they are still learning, and I think they will learn. But I come back to this point. It's not the diplomacy. The best diplomat in the world cannot sell a lousy brief. If your brief is bad, your diplomacy will fail, however good you may be as an individual diplomat.
Oh, thanks, sir. So yeah, that was quite a good point. Does anyone have any final questions? Because we only have around 10 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm very sorry I have to leave on the dot.
Yes, yeah, no problem, sir. Okay, so if that's the case, let me wrap up. Let me have the last question because of time concerns. I think this question will be relevant for all of us, as you know, a community of China watchers, because a lot have transpired in the past few years or even the past few months. So for the last question that I hope to ask is that what is one advice you would give to everyone who are watching geopolitics closely? So really unravel what is the real cause of an issue, because I believe because all the recent posts that are flying around, be it US election or China politics whatsoever, there's just so much noise going around. So wanted to seek your advice as a veteran diplomat to share some of your experiences and advice with us.
My advice is Deng Xiaoping's advice to his party: seek truth from facts. Don't confuse opinions with facts. Look at what people do. Don't just listen to what people say. It's not brain surgery, It's actually quite straightforward, but people get confused because for the reason you say, there's a lot of noise. A lot of the noise are not facts. A lot of the noise are just noise. Particularly in diplomacy, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of fake news, what is now called fake news, what used to be called in my time misinformation or disinformation. That is a fact of life. You will learn to sift through it with experience and time if you keep your eye on the fact, not on the noise. And the facts are usually fewer than opinions, and they are clearer, although obscured by noise. You can see there are not too many facts. I give you a simple fact, right? People talk about decoupling, right? Very good. Both of them talk about decoupling because greater reliance on domestic circulation is the Chinese way of saying decoupling, self-reliance. Okay. I want to be self-reliant. This and Trump talks about I want to decouple. I don't want to be dependent on China for anything. But you look at the facts. Right now, I don't say it's not going to happen, but right now it is not happening. It's happening only in certain narrow domains because the trade in figures have not been impacted very much. Not more than you would expect given that the global trade has been affected by the pandemic. In fact, it has gone up a bit. Investment has not been affected. What has been affected? Movement of peoples, but is it because of the restrictions or because we can't, none of us can travel anyway, right? So these are like facts. Don't look at the noise. That what they both say is a lot of noise. Okay, when I read some years ago about the plans I told you about that were announced in 2013 about giving a decisive role for the market and all that, my first reaction is this: okay, this is very good because this is what they should do, right? But then let's not rush to judgment. Let's just sit and watch. And that's 2012. From 2012 to 2017, it became clear the implementation was just not there, which didn't really surprise me because in China, it's always a question of implementation or not being implemented in the way they said they would do it, right? And where there was good implementation, where the announcements and the action more or less matched was in the financial sector. They did liberalize, letting foreigners in more and so on. And I think they will continue to do that. But so no, it's not. So look at facts and make up your own mind. Don't get your opinions from the New York Times or the Washington Post or People's Daily or Global Times, make up your own mind. It's not brain surgery. It's common sense, which is quite rare actually.
Okay, sir, we are only left with 7 minutes, but I think there's are you fine with taking one last question or
Sure.
Sorry, so this question is from Swan. Swan, can I trouble you to
Hi.
ask a question and keep it within 7 minutes?
Sorry, I
Thank you.
had so many questions.
Yeah.
I'm actually very keen for your personal insight as to our Singapore diplomatic corps. I think, do you feel like the diplomatic corps or the emerging Singapore student population wanting to enter the diplomatic corps, are we equipped, in terms of our knowledge on China, to kind of support the government in making the best policy in navigating China or US-China relations?
I think the problem with our diplomatic corps, as it has been now, and I can be fairly objective since I've been out of it. I've been out of it in one role for 7 years and in the other role for 3 years. Right? I retired in 2013 as permanent secretary, and I retired as ambassador at large in 2018. So 2 years, sorry. I think we have become a little bit too bureaucratic and too routinized, not bold enough. Right? Can't be helped, I suppose, because people's personalities are different. The system is bigger now, and you can't act in the same way as you used to do, right? But as far as China is concerned, okay, I'll tell you a story. It's the advantage of being a true story. It's not about the foreign service per se. It's about the whole. It was about the whole of government. This was about maybe 15 years ago or so, or a bit more. The head of civil service then and the head of the public service PSD department, which is in charge of the civil service, came to me, and I was second permanent secretary, I think then, and said, we need to get the Singapore civil service China ready. I said, that's great. What do you mean by China ready? Right? He said that we must teach our civil servants about China. I said, yeah, but you can't possibly make the entire civil service China experts, or even semi-experts, right? And no, we will teach everybody who wants to learn Mandarin, and it was very, it's free practically, if you want to learn and so on. But I told them, you are doing things, and this is all intended for us to make ourselves useful to China, relevant to China, so we can think. I said, friends, you are doing it the wrong way around, right? China knows about China. They want to know about certain policies in Singapore. So it's not a question of getting yourself China ready. It's trying to find out what they want to know and sending those people to China. Language and all that, this is a secondary issue. Because there are such things as interpreters. Some are very good, right? And we have good interpreters in Singapore, and they have better interpreters actually in China, right? So you're going, it's not, when you say go and get China ready, what do you mean? You mean something very simple. You mean getting people to understand that China is important, to get people to look at China objectively, not, as I said, facts, not seek truth from facts, not opinions or noise, and make them want to go there, right? As far as that is concerned, I think, and they were going it the wrong way around. They were trying to make everybody China expert, which is impossible. You will give everybody a superficial veneer of things that they know, which makes them more dangerous. then a little learning is it's a very dangerous thing. So in that sense, we are not doing very well. But as far as the foreign service is concerned, I think we are doing okay. We got enough people. We don't need to have everybody know everything. Everybody should know something, because wherever you go, if you are posted to the Middle East, let's say, right, your host government will want to know what you think about China, what's happening in China. So you should know something. and you should be fed enough information from your HQ so that you can carry on an intelligent conversation about China at least. But the China specialists, we have enough. Maybe we could do with a few more. But it's getting harder and harder. At least when I left, it was getting harder to people to take up scholarships to go and study in China. The Chinese have this talent of pissing people off. I know of, not just in the foreign service, in many countries, people go, and especially in the countries where Chinese is not one of the languages, right? You have people who struggle very hard. Ang Mohs are mainly, right? Caucasians, right? Struggle very hard. They learn some Chinese and then they get themselves to China to study, right? And almost invariably they come back pissed off. And I've told my Chinese friends, they say, this is not the way to make friends and influence people, But I think we have enough. We have, okay, I tell you a story of how Chinese piss people. We had one officer in the foreign service who is not Chinese. She is Eurasian, but she was perfectly bilingual. Not merely in language, but in culture too. She can kind of code switch, everything, right? Because the China people ignore her because they look at her, they say, you can't speak Chinese, forget it. You're from Singapore, you're not Chinese, you're not really Singaporean. She got pissed off like hell, all right? But she was a secret weapon because she could always listen and nobody knew that she could understand them. Everybody assumed she can't understand them. But we have enough people. But don't forget, China ready is a question of knowing things that they will find relevant. Not knowing everything about them. Not many people can do that. I don't claim to know a lot about China. I know more than many people, but not a lot. Right? I don't think even some scholars of China would not in China, but outside scholars of China would not claim to know a lot about China. It's a huge place. There's always something more to know. The point is always to want to know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kausikan, for the reply. So in view of time, we will wrap up the session here.
Sorry, I have to go. We can meet in some other time.
Thanks, really appreciate it. So thanks.
A time where we can meet.
In person, we look forward to it. So thanks again to everyone for the question and participation. And this session has come to an end, and I wish everyone an excellent weekend ahead, and take care and stay safe during these COVID times. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're all welcome. Bye.
Bye.